May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. World War II in Europe is over. Beneath the Atlantic Ocean, in Norwegian fjords, in ports across Europe, more than 150 German U-boats received the order. Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor and former U-boat commander, issues a simple but historic command. All U-boats are to cease operations, surface, and surrender to the nearest Allied authority. The long war beneath the Atlantic is over. Within hours, submarines begin surfacing. Exhausted crews hoist white flags. Allied aircraft circle overhead. Watching, waiting. These U-boats once terrorized Allied shipping, sank thousands of merchant vessels, nearly starved Britain into submission. They represented the cutting edge of naval technology, the most advanced submarines in the world. Now they're defeated, surrendering. Their war ended by radio message. What happens to them? Do they get scrapped, studied, divided among the victors? The answer, all of the above, and some fates stranger than you might think. Because what happened to German U-boats after World War II is a story of deliberate destruction, technological espionage, and Cold War competition. Most would be deliberately sunk in the Atlantic. A few would serve new masters under different flags. Several would become museums, and some would influence submarine design for decades. This is the story of what happened to the U-boats after World War II. How the wolfpack surrendered, how Operation Deadlight destroyed most of them, how the survivors were studied and copied, and how a handful remain today as reminders of the war beneath the waves. Let's start with the surrender. May 8, 1945. Germany's capitulation is official. Admiral Dönitz broadcasts the order. All U-boats must surface, report their positions, and sail to the nearest Allied port. No scuttling, no resistance. Unconditional surrender. Across the North Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay, and the fjords of Norway, U-boat commanders receive the message. For many, it's a shock. They've been at sea for weeks, months in some cases, cut off from news, fighting a war they thought was still winnable. Some commanders comply immediately. Surface, hoist the black flag of surrender, radio their positions. Others hesitate, consider scuttling their boats, denying the enemy this technology. A few refuse entirely, continue fighting, or attempt to escape to Argentina or Japan, but most obey. Within days, over 150 U-boats are heading toward Allied ports. They sail toward Loch Arabole in Scotland, Lisa Halley in Northern Ireland, Portland in southern England. Each arrival marks the quiet collapse of the wolfpack fleet that once haunted Allied shipping lanes. The surrender process is tightly controlled. Allied warships escort the submarines into port. Royal Navy and U.S. Navy boarding parties immediately seize control. They confiscate codes, charts, weapons, anything of intelligence value. Engineers catalog the vessels, document their condition, assess which are worth studying and which are only scrap. At Loch Arabole, nearly 40 U-boats anchor together, a grim parade of defeat. The logistics are immense, towing and securing submarines from across occupied Europe, providing food and water for thousands of German sailors, processing surrenders, managing prisoners. A few U-boats never make it, scuttled by their crews before reaching port, or lost to mechanical failure after months underwater. The condition of many boats is terrible, rusted, battle-scarred, barely seaworthy. Some have been at sea for months without proper maintenance. Their batteries are dying, engines failing, hulls leaking. Others show evidence of recent combat, depth charge damage, bullet holes, improvised repairs. The surrendered crews are exhausted, malnourished. Some haven't seen land in over 60 days. Allied authorities separate officers from enlisted men, begin interrogations, especially targeting engineers familiar with new propulsion systems or torpedo technology. The rest of the crews endure long months of captivity, uncertain of their fates. By late 1945, most are repatriated to a defeated, divided Germany, but the submarines remain. By year's end, harbors from Trondheim to Portsmouth are clogged with captured U-boats. Allied leaders face a pressing question: what to do with the world's most advanced submarine fleet? The decision isn't simple. The United States wants to study the revolutionary Type 21 and Type 23 designs. These boats represent the future of submarine warfare. Britain agrees, but also wants to prevent any resurgence of German naval power. Destruction seems safest. The Soviet Union, entering the early Cold War, demands its share of the captured technology. France wants compensation, reparations, access to German naval secrets. Smaller allied nations also want a peace: Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands. A compromise is reached. The Tripartite Naval Commission is formed in August 1945. The commission allocates the surrendered fleet between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. Each power receives 10 U-boats for examination. Priority given to the advanced Type 21 and Type 23 designs. These submarines are different from earlier models. Streamlined hulls, greater battery capacity, snorkel systems. They're designed to fight primarily beneath the surface rather than above it. Revolutionary. The remaining U-boats, over 100 of them, are marked for destruction. Keeping them afloat is costly. Storing them indefinitely is impossible. The Royal Navy therefore approves Operation Deadlight, a plan to tow the captured submarines out into the Atlantic and sink them. Between November 1945 and February 1946, this quiet operation will erase most of the Kriegsmarine's undersea fleet from existence. Operation Deadlight begins in autumn 1945. The Royal Navy has gathered more than 100 surrendered U-boats in British harbors. In total, 156 U-boats had surrendered to the Allies. Of these, 116 are designated for destruction under Deadlight. The plan is straightforward: tow them out into the Atlantic, sink them. The Royal Navy divides the operation into 3 dumping areas, designated X, X, YY, and ZZ. The U-boats, designed to dive beneath such conditions, are vulnerable on the surface, especially when being towed. As a result, more than a third of the U-boats never make it to the scuttling zones. 56 vessels founder or sink on the way, dragged down by rough weather or structural failure. The Royal Navy records each loss, but makes little effort to recover them. Deadlight's purpose is destruction, not preservation. If a U-boat sinks en route, mission accomplished. For the submarines that do reach the dumping areas, the end is quick. Destroyers and frigates finish the job. Crews sometimes use aerial rockets or naval gunfire to ensure the boats go under quickly. Roughly 100 to 120 nautical miles northwest of Ireland, deep water, far from shipping lanes. There, the submarines will be sunk either by naval gunfire, explosive charges, or by simply opening their sea valves. The first phase begins in November 1945. Royal Navy tugs start towing groups of submarines from Scottish and Irish ports. But many of the U-boats are in dreadful condition. Some have been at sea for months without maintenance. Others are battered by Allied bombing or deliberate sabotage. Their ballast tanks leak. Their engines are seized. Their hulls are weakened by rust. In stormy winter seas, towing these unstable wrecks is hazardous. The Atlantic in November is brutal. Waves over 30 feet, winds exceeding 50 knots, freezing rain. In some cases, the sea valves are simply opened. The submarine floods and sinks. In others, explosive charges are placed inside the hull, detonated remotely. The most thorough method, naval gunfire. Destroyers pumping shells into the pressure hull until it ruptures and floods. Among the doomed submarines is U-2336, the last U-boat to sink Allied ships during the war. She surrendered at Lisahally in June 1945, deliberately sunk off Ireland in January 1946. U-295 meets the same fate on December 17, 1945, towed from Loch Ryan and sent to the bottom. U-3503, U-3004, U-2326, U-2329. One after another, they disappear beneath the waves. The operation continues through the winter, towing, sinking, recording. Not all U-boats are destroyed. The most advanced examples, the Type 21 and Type 23 boats, are spared for study. These represent the future of submarine design. The Allies want to understand them, copy them, apply their innovations to future fleets. The U-2511, Germany's only fully operational Type 21 at the war's end, is scuttled last. On February 7, 1946, This marks the official conclusion of Operation Deadlight. In less than 4 months, the Royal Navy has disposed of 116 U-boats, plus the 56 that sank en route, 172 German submarines sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. For decades, the Deadlight wrecks lie forgotten on the seabed. Then, between 2001 and 2003, maritime archaeologist Innes McCartney leads expeditions that rediscover many of them. Using sonar and deep-sea photography, his team identifies at least 14 intact U-boat hulls, preserved in the cold Atlantic mud. Upright, their decks still armed, their steel now encrusted with coral and history. The findings reveal how hastily the scuttlings were carried out. Many boats sank in formation. Some are less than a mile apart. The documentation from 1945 to 46 helps McCartney locate them. Royal Navy charts, position reports, coordinates. The wrecks lie in depths of 300 to 600 feet, too deep for casual diving, but accessible to researchers with proper equipment. The discovery brings attention to this forgotten graveyard. Operation Deadlight had served its purpose, to erase the physical presence of Hitler's U-boat fleet, yet its aftermath left an unintended legacy, a vast underwater cemetery stretching across the North Atlantic. Silent testimony to the end of Germany's submarine war. While most U-boats met their end in the Atlantic, a select few survived. To the Allies, these submarines were more than wartime relics. They were technological blueprints that could redefine undersea warfare. Between 1945 and 1948, dozens of captured boats were retained, repaired, or distributed among the victorious powers, becoming test subjects in the dawn of the Cold War. The Tripartite Naval Commission allocates the surrendered fleet carefully. The United States receives 10 U-boats for examination. The United Kingdom receives 10. The Soviet Union receives 10. Priority is given to the advanced Type 21 and Type 23 designs. Their streamlined hulls, greater battery capacity, and snorkel systems represent a revolutionary step. Submarines designed to fight primarily beneath the surface rather than above it. In Britain, the Royal Navy integrates several vessels for testing. U-3017 is renamed HMSN-41. She undergoes submerged trials and endurance runs before being scrapped in 1949. U-190 surrenders off Newfoundland, taken into Canadian service as a training platform for sonar and torpedo practice. The Royal Navy also uses captured hulls to refine depth charge tactics, detonating explosives near real German steel rather than mock targets. It's practical. If you're going to sink them anyway, learn from them first. The United States takes similar interest. Captured submarines are studied extensively at naval facilities in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and New London, Connecticut. Crews of the U.S. submarine force examine propulsion systems, silent running technology, periscope design. Features that will later influence America's first post-war submarine classes. Particularly significant is U-234, a long-range cargo submarine captured on May 14, 1945. She was en route to Japan with a secret payload, uranium oxide, jet engine components, advanced technology. Germany was sharing with its Pacific ally. U.S. Navy engineers study her construction and cargo, before sinking her during weapons tests in 1947. The uranium from U-234 becomes part of the Manhattan Project, used in early atomic bomb development. A German submarine inadvertently contributes to the weapon that ends the Pacific War. Across Europe, other navies receive their shares. The Soviet Union acquires several prize Type 21 boats, features that will later influence America's first post-war submarine classes. Particularly significant is U-234, a long-range cargo submarine captured on May 14, 1945. She was en route to Japan with a secret payload, uranium oxide, jet engine components, advanced technology. Germany was sharing with its Pacific ally. U.S. Navy engineers study her construction and cargo before sinking her during weapons tests in 1947. The uranium from U-234 becomes part of the Manhattan Project. Used in early atomic bomb development, a German submarine inadvertently contributes to the weapon that ends the Pacific War. Across Europe, other navies receive their shares. The Soviet Union acquires several prize Type 21 boats. These serve as direct templates for the later Whiskey-class submarines. Soviet shipyards dissect German hulls plate by plate, replicating the pressure-resistant architecture and snorkel systems. The technology gives their new fleet a sudden technological leap. To the west, it's a worrying development. The same German engineering that once hunted Allied convoys is now fueling an arms race beneath the Arctic ice. Smaller nations also benefit. France, rebuilding its navy after years of occupation, takes over several boats from Allied stockpiles. U-123 serves for several years under the French flag before being decommissioned. Norway operates others for training and coastal patrol. Denmark uses German submarine technology in its post-war shipbuilding programs. Yet not every transfer is purely scientific. The redistribution of U-boats becomes an early symbol of post-war geopolitics. Britain and the United States hope that sharing German technology will maintain balance among the Allies. But as the Soviet Union expands its fleet, cooperation quickly turns into competition. The U-boats have changed owners, but their strategic value remains. By the end of the decade, most of the retained submarines have served their purpose. Deliberately sunk or dismantled, their secrets extracted, their usefulness exhausted. Still, their influence proves lasting. The innovations of the Type 21, its batteries, hydrodynamics, and underwater speed, become the design foundation for nearly every conventional submarine built through the 1950s. In a sense, Germany's final wartime invention becomes the blueprint for the nuclear age. The first American nuclear submarine, USS Nautilus, commissioned in 1954, incorporates design features studied from Type 21 boats. The Soviet November-class nuclear submarines also show German influence. Even modern diesel-electric submarines owe their heritage to Type 21 innovations. Germany lost the war, but won the future of submarine design. While hundreds of U-boats were scuttled or scrapped, a handful escaped destruction and entered a new chapter. These survivors, scattered across Europe and North America, turned from weapons of war into artifacts of remembrance. Among the best known is U-995, a Type 7C submarine that surrendered in May 1945 at Trondheim, Norway. She served briefly in the Norwegian Navy as KNM Kora, training Norwegian submariners, testing tactics. In 1965, Norway returned her to Germany. Today, U-995 rests at Labo, near Kiel, preserved as a museum ship beside the Marine Ehrenmal Memorial. Visitors who step inside experience the oppressive quarters where 45 men once lived, worked, and fought for weeks at a time. The cramped bunks, the tiny galley, the torpedo room, the control room. It's claustrophobic, uncomfortable, authentic. Over 300,000 people visit annually, making U-995 Enmots one of the most visited submarine museums in the world. In France, several captured U-boats were used in the post-war Navy. U-123, renamed Blazin, became one of the few to see regular peacetime service. When retired, she was preserved in Lorient, once one of the Kriegsmarine's main U-boat bases. Other survivors lie in unusual circumstances. U-534 was scuttled by her crew in May 1945 to avoid capture. She sat on the bottom of the Kattegat Strait for 48 years. In 1993, she was raised, a massive salvage operation costing millions. Now she's displayed in Birkenhead, England, her hull cut into sections to reveal the claustrophobic interior. Visitors can walk through her compartments, see where the crew lived, where they fought, where some died. Across the Atlantic, the United States preserved one emblematic submarine, U-505, captured intact on June 4, 1944, the only German U-boat captured during the war, a tremendous intelligence coup. Her Enigma machine and codebooks provided invaluable intelligence, helped Allied codebreakers read German naval communications for the rest of the war. After serving as an intelligence prize, U-505 was eventually transferred to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. She remains there today, meticulously restored, the first enemy warship ever displayed on American soil. Over 1 million people visit annually. The submarine sits in an underground exhibit, climate-controlled, preserved for future generations. Visitors can tour the interior, Walk through the same corridors German submariners walked. See the same instruments they used. It's powerful, educational, sobering, but the majority of Germany's U-boats never reached museums. The wrecks from Operation Deadlight still line the seabed off northwest Ireland, forming one of the world's largest underwater graveyards. For decades they were forgotten, marked only by coordinates on Royal Navy charts. Now, thanks to McCartney's research, we know where many lie. 14 have been positively identified. More are suspected. They sit upright on the ocean floor, slowly corroding, becoming part of the ecosystem. Fish shelter in their hulls. Coral grows on their conning towers. Nature reclaims them. Occasionally, fishing nets snag on them, requiring expensive salvage operations to free the nets. But mostly, they're left alone. Underwater monuments to the men who served aboard them. Public fascination with U-boats has only grown. Museums in Hamburg, Kiel, and Le Beau draw thousands each year. Historians study the tactics and lives behind the steel. Documentaries explore their operations, their technology, their impact on the war. For veterans and researchers alike, these submarines are more than relics. They're reminders of the human cost beneath the waves. Over 30,000 German submariners died during World War II, 75% of all who served, the highest casualty rate of any branch of the German military. Countless Allied sailors also never returned, killed when their merchant ships or warships were torpedoed. The machines that once symbolized stealth and precision now stand for loss, innovation, and remembrance. Today, the preserved boats and the wrecks below the Atlantic serve as twin memorials, one above water, one below, telling the final story of Germany's submarine fleet, an empire of steel that now rests in silence between history and the sea. The U-boat war shaped World War II profoundly. Between 1939 and 1945, U-boats sank over 3,000 Allied ships, totaling more than 14 million tons. They nearly succeeded in cutting Britain's supply lines, nearly starved the island nation into submission. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous military campaign of the war, from September 1939 to May 1945. Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the war, lost 785 in combat or accidents. The cost was staggering on both sides. For the Allies, 30,248 merchant sailors dead, 5,150 Allied warship personnel killed. For Germany, 28,000 submariners dead. Only about 7,000 survived the war. The technology developed during this undersea war influenced naval warfare for decades. The snorkel, allowing submarines to run diesel engines while submerged. Invented by the Dutch, perfected by Germans, now standard on all diesel submarines. The Type 21 design, streamlined hull, increased battery capacity, higher underwater speed, became the template for all post-war conventional submarines. Acoustic torpedoes, homing on the sound of propellers, first developed by Germany, now standard worldwide. Even the tactics, wolfpack operations, coordinated attacks, radio communication, influenced Cold War submarine doctrine. So, what happened to the German submarines after World War II? Most were destroyed. Operation Deadlight sent 116 to the bottom of the Atlantic. 56 more sank en route. A select few were studied, divided among the Allies, tested, analyzed, their secrets extracted. Some served under new flags, French, Norwegian, Soviet, American, training a new generation of submariners, and a handful were preserved, became museums, educational tools, reminders of what was. From 1,162 U-boats built, perhaps 5 survive as museum ships today. That's a survival rate of 0.4%, 0.4%. For every 250 U-boats built, one still exists. But those survivors carry the memory of all the others. Every visitor who walks through U-995 at Labo, or U-505 in Chicago, or U-534 in Birkenhead. They're experiencing history, touching the same metal, walking the same decks, seeing the same instruments, the cramped quarters, the primitive conditions, the constant danger. It builds understanding, empathy, respect for those who served, not celebrating war, but remembering, learning, ensuring the lessons aren't forgotten. The U-boats after World War II teach us several lessons. About the cost of war. Over 58,000 people died in the submarine war. Sailors on both sides. Most were young men, early 20s. Their lives ended beneath the waves. About the pace of technological change. The Type 21 design of 1944 influenced submarine development for decades. Innovation driven by war, applied in peace. About the value of preservation. Without museums like U505 and U995, this history would be abstract, numbers in books. Now it's tangible, real. About reconciliation, former enemies studying each other's technology, working together to understand what happened, moving forward while remembering the past. The story of the U-boats after World War II is complete, from surrender to destruction. From study to preservation, from weapons to warnings. The wolfpacks that terrorize the Atlantic are gone, destroyed by Operation Deadlight, or corroded on the ocean floor. But their influence remains, in submarine design, in naval tactics, in museums and memories. The empire of steel that once ruled beneath the waves now serves as a teacher, reminding us of what was, warning us of what could be again, preserving history so we can learn from it. That's what happened to the German submarines after World War II. They surrendered, were studied, were destroyed, were preserved, and they still teach us. 80 years later, from museum decks and ocean floors, silent witnesses to the war beneath the waves,